Well, we got to talk about the Dark Side of the Ring episode with our old friend, my old friend and protege, Sherri Martel, Sister Sherri, Sensational Sherri, uh,
Scary Sherri.
Scary Sherri,
That's
all
how
the.
my dad called her that always.
I guess that was the period that he first became cognizant of her. Right?
Yeah, he didn't know who she was, and all of a sudden, Brutus Beefcake was on Brother Love Show yelling about how she's Scary Sherri, and my dad, who didn't like wrestling, thought it was funny, and that name stuck with him. Scary. He would always go, "Whatever happened to Scary Sherri?"
But I'll tell you what. These programs, I've mentioned it before, the A&E stuff and the WWE endorsed official products, they're telling too many of the same stories. They're cross-pollinating with the talking heads. We're going into everybody's biography that we've just seen in order to hear about the rivalry between the two people we just saw the biography of. And we're seeing the same shit over and over. It's always nice to see the older stuff because it looks so much better, but I'm getting a little tired of some of the same people talking about the same things. With Dark Side, they've been able to break that trend over the past few weeks with Chris Adams, with Chris Colt. Now with Sherri, even though Sherri was such a big part of the WWF for so long, when you see a lot of these clips now, you realize when you go back, they're not only not featuring Sherri, who was one of their, if not their first major female heel, definitely. Elizabeth came a little bit beforehand as a personality, but they sometimes they trim her out of shit, like they trim her out of a lot of Michael's stuff. I don't mean like excise every bit and blur her face like she's goddamn Vince, but but they don't dwell on any of it. So a lot of this stuff was stuff that you haven't seen in quite some time. Also, do you get what I mean? They're not even exploiting her intellectual property.
No, they do nothing with her. And, I thought they did a pretty good job with this documentary. There were a few things, in terms of the clips they played versus what they were talking about that were out of order. She really got elevated to the big time with Randy Savage. They kind of made it seem like it was Ted DiBiase in this thing with the clips.
Yeah.
But for a few years there, Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase, who was still, right up there near the top. And then she was used to help get Shawn Michaels to the next place because he had just become a single. He was a heel, but he didn't really show all the... He didn't have all the personality down yet in front of the camera.
Right. And that's an idea for the people today who maybe weren't around then and don't have the context of the thing in real time. Sherri was a name that was used to help elevate Shawn Michaels. So
Shawn Michaels, also, it's a different scale. She was used to elevate Shane Douglas in ECW.
Yeah.
That was one of the things too. And then they didn't even really mention this in there, but she was put with Flair opposite Hogan when Hogan came in.
Yeah, well, and I know that Rick was over the moon about Sherri and how great she was and the job she did. And I think Hogan also knew that it was going to be even easier if he had somebody like that in the corner. So that's probably one of the rare times where you have both sides of a major program wanting somebody else to be added to it. And that's... She knew the business and she worked hard and she had personality and she got what to do. And that's a common statement throughout this program that everybody said that. And the bumps she took to get things over, which were obviously what led to, her problems later on, her physical problems and her, issues. But she wanted to do this. I didn't even know that she'd wanted to do this for so fucking long. To the point where, she was a fan that went to the matches, and I think they said she went with her mom in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, but she was going, again, they moved to Louisiana. She was going to the matches in Mid-South before Mid-South was even Mid-South Wrestling, back when it was still Leroy McGurk's territory. And I had never seen a picture of or heard talk. I'd heard of him. Obviously, I knew she had been married beforehand, but her first husband, he didn't have any Cajun in him, did he? I hadn't heard an accent like that since 1984. But I don't know how these two star-crossed lovers didn't hit it off and live a happy life. Brian, let me recap this. He meets her. She's working in a strip club in New Orleans and swept him off his feet and moved into his trailer and then married him. And then they had a baby. But that's where the biggest shocking thing was that we heard from the program was that when her son was like 3 months old, that's when she left and said, I'm going to go be a wrestler. And everybody's like, how could you do that? They ignored this fucking guy lived in a trailer.
Oh, he seemed like a nice guy.
But I'm sorry, she's working
a hard-working guy.
She's working in a strip club, and she sweeps him off his feet, and he's living in a trailer, and they get married. Now she's got a baby. She's probably, my God, I was going to be a wrestler and be on TV, and now I've married Cajun Pete over here, and I've got a baby, and I'm living in a fucking trailer.
She was also young.
Better than this.
That's the other thing. She was also young. She was still a teenager,
and she,
right?
Yeah, she was. Well, I think she was 20 at that point. She would have been 20 years old at that point by the time, And she gets trained by the outlaw guy. That guy in Memphis was so outlaw that I'd never heard of him before. No, seriously. It wasn't even like Aubrey Griffith that had been around in West Memphis and got Lawler started or whatever. But the horrible thing was when they said, and this was true, when they had taken an interview of Sherri's, one of the shoot interviews she'd done before she passed away, and said, well, she went in when she was 16 years old and talked to Grizzly Smith that I want to be a wrestler. And that was true because Grizz filled the same position for Leroy McGurk that he did later on for Watts. He was the agent, the matchmaker, whatever, at that point in time after he'd retired from the ring in early mid-70s. And he told her, come back when you're 21. And now in hindsight, that the comments that she made, and that was what he told her, that was from 15 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever, but it's aged differently since then. He may be the only person he ever told to come back when you're 21.
Was she already dating Jake or fooling around with Jake? Whatever their relationship was, it wasn't.
Well, exactly. Yes, but here's the thing. She's 17 years old. She's going to the matches. He's 18 years old, and he's a referee. She wants to be a wrestler. That's not hard to figure out. That's the way it worked in those days. But I don't want to sully Sherri's memory by having people go, oh, he's saying she was a rat, but she was a rat. Okay, and she would have probably said yes. That's what I was doing at the time, because it would have been far from uncommon if a 17-year-old girl going to the wrestling matches in those days wasn't trying to mess around with one of the boys. It was almost unheard of for that, unless you were a member of one of those large Catholic families that fucking kept a fucking string on everybody. But anyway, and that's, that was the thing, is she ended up moving to Memphis and getting trained by an outlaw group, but she still wasn't really in the business. And when she went back to Grizzly, she's 21 and she's been trained kind of, and she got a license, which you could back in those days with the athletic commission. So that's when they sent her, if you're going to do this, Moolah, here, we got a girl. But then, and the show may have been worth it only for the pictures of Moolah Mansion on Moolah Drive. Did you get a kick out of seeing the compound there?
You hear so much about it. There's so many stories. I don't know if I had ever seen extensively what it looked like until this.
And it was just, she had... Gosh,
had you ever seen it before?
Yeah, I saw it a couple. I've never been inside, but I'd seen pictures and I'd seen the entranceway. We'd driven past it in Columbia one time. But it was Moolah Drive. She had, I think, between 10 and 20 acres. And not only was there the big main house with all kind of a big wing, but there were outbuildings where A lot of the girls would live while they were training there, and then the barn they had the ring in. But the Moolah Drive sign doesn't look like it's being kept up by the city, but I think that's the actual legitimate post office address. She got her own road. But anyway, that was Sherri didn't last long there because Moolah couldn't control her, and that was the story she told. If I couldn't keep to the curfew, she was going out and fucking doing whatever, and she wasn't going to do whatever the fuck Moolah told her to do unless it was involving wrestling. So she got booted from the camp. And did you like the part about her ex-husband saying he hired a private investigator to follow her, and then 3 guys showed up and told him to leave her alone?
She belongs to us now.
Yes.
Who's that?
It was nobody. Either that or Sherri may have told some of the boys, hey, can you go see this guy and fucking scare him or whatever? But it sounded...
I think it may have been that, if I had to guess.
But they wouldn't say she belongs to us now. He was making it sound like it was the mafia. Anyway. So I can't say I have any sympathy for the ex-husband. But the sympathy that everybody had was for the son. And I'd never met her son before. I guess she used to take him some when she was on that WWF run. And that was... Obviously, we met early. They had the clip of me the 1 week on TV where I managed her. And, then I didn't see her again for probably almost another 10 years. And then during that period of time, I'd been the hottest manager in Crockett, and she'd been the hottest manager in the WWF, all things considered, for some of that run. And then she's the one that beat me for manager of the year that year in the Observer. But then when I went back to the WWE, that's when she was about done there. But we got back, we're like 10 years later, we're like, who the fuck would have thought this? She was scared shitless to be on TV because that was one of her earlier TV appearances, that show in Memphis. And I was scared shitless because I had not managed anybody and didn't yet know what the fuck I was doing. But then when we got back together 10 years later, we're both in the WWF on top. But anyway, the point is, she took her son on. They had pictures of him and Hulk and him and a lot of the boys, and she took him on the road with him some. But you saw from the older pictures, he was a bigger kid and maybe heavy set. But now they said apparently he'd had cancer, lost part of his tongue. He was having problems talking and had lost a lot of weight. And that's where I think a lot of people had the sympathy and they were shocked about Sherri leaving her son and blah, blah, blah. But he said that Sherri made the best decision. And you have to think about it. I don't know that Sherri Martel would have been happy living in a fucking trailer in Louisiana. So him being raised by his stepmother, and then finding out that his real mother is a legend, he wished he'd had more time with her, but he didn't harbor any ill will. And that maybe, things may have worked out better for him and her in the long run, that things happened the way they did. But it was shocking to see, because even though Sherri was a couple of years older than me, I guess by the time that the 90s rolled around, well, they showed a clip where she came in when she had been let go from the WWF for the drug test. I brought her to Smoky Mountain to do a weekend of shows and work against Tammy. And I was about to say, I considered her like one of the kids even then, or by contemporary at least, but she was a couple of years older. So he is now... her son, mid to late 40s. But he's had obviously health decisions, and that was health decisions, health problems in, in his life. And that was hard to see. But the problem again becomes, they go through her whole career, but by then it's as a main eventer, she's taken more bumps and then she's taken more pills. And Sherri, recreationally would take a few things to begin with, but when it became necessity and when it was for treating shit and she couldn't fucking afford to at the end to get her back fixed, couldn't afford the surgery. As Medusa Michelli, who looked great, said that it should have happened to several of the guys too that get fired for flunking the drug test, but it happened to her. But that was, again, it's the same story that we've been hearing too often on these shows lately, that the substances lead to a unhappy end. But the talking heads were better also. Kathy Fitzpatrick, or as I used to refer to her, Kathy Farquhar, and Medusa and Rockin' Robin and Jake and Bischoff were integral in this one. But we saw a few different talking heads on this show as well. And at least we got to see her induction in the Hall of Fame, which almost would have come too late because she died 2 months later.
Yeah, nice to see Kathy Fitzpatrick in this one. I used to go down to Dennis Carluzzo's show. She was the nicest person in the whole world. She helped me out a lot. She sometimes when I took the train down there, she picked me up at the train station. Really, really nice person.
And I got to say this, and Kathy, I love you. I'm sorry I got bad information, but when the Dark Side guys came down here, we shot the footage for this year before last. And I had a picture of me and Sherri and Paul Bearer and Kathy Fitzpatrick was in it at one of the fan fests. I said, well, everybody's dead now except me, because I could have sworn if you'd have held a gun to me, somebody had told me a couple of years ago that Kathy Fitzpatrick got sick and died. And I swear I believed that. And I told him that. And then Evan called me a week later and said, well, we talked to Kathy Fitzpatrick. I said, I thought she was dead. And he said, yeah, she's very upset at you for thinking that. So I apologize for killing you, Kathy. No, Kathy
pulled a Mike Lano. Mike Lano announced Dan Farron died twice on the radio.
Well, but he was talking about performance-wise. But Kathy used to take me down to do Joel Goodhart's radio spots when Joel was running. And I would go and do radio plugs for his shows and all that stuff. She'd drive me around there.
And she was also an ECW original. She was the original ticket taker, I believe, for ECW.
Yes. But anyway, bravo, another heart-rendering episode of Dark Side of the Ring on Sherri Martel. And I loved Sherri. I appreciated what she did for me when she came to work for me in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Because, again, that was getting Tammy over, because Sherri was one of probably the biggest female name to the most amount of fans in the wrestling business in 1993. And
absolutely.
She's coming on.
No, without question. Absolutely.
Yeah. And she's coming down and working my shows in Barberville, Kentucky, Knoxville, Tennessee, Johnson City, Tennessee. And where the fuck else did we send her? And she was happy to do it and gave Tammy some on-a-job training and some lessons while she was there, advice, whatever you want to call them. So, I really enjoyed being able to have her there at that time.
All right, and I'm sure you'll feel the same way about the next Dark Side episode. Is it the Sandman?
I will probably not feel the same way. I never booked the Sandman, nor attempted to book the Sandman, nor actually, I will admit that while the Sandman to me represented all the things about ECW that I thought were bad for the wrestling business, that was the greatest entrance that you could ever see. If he could have just done that and then not wrestled, it'd have been great. But Paul was a genius with doing things that you couldn't imagine could be done with things with, if that makes any sense.
Well, it helps having a susceptible crowd.
Well, you mean the Kool-Aid drinkers?
That's right.
No. But Paul manipulated them into liking the taste of that Kool-Aid. And then he was able to, through smoke and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, through smoke and mirrors and a convoluted line of thinking, he was able to disguise people's weaknesses and give them strengths that they may not have even known they had and exploit them. But the problem was he had to create the environment, and a lot of that stuff didn't translate to any other solar system. But he was great at what he did. He concentrated a lot on the caca part of wrestling instead of the good part of wrestling, because the caca was easier to sell to those people at that time.